Welcome to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, here to share some amazing conversations. We're talking business, health, making and saving money, or starting something epic. Think of this as your go-to spot for stories that do a lot more than just kill time. They spark ideas, give you a boost, and perhaps even change the way you look at the world. I'm pulling in the experts, the thinkers, the doers, and the dreamers. We're about to dive into stories that open doors and ideas that light up your brain. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Debbie Weisse. How are you today, Debbie?
Great, Desiree. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. I am so excited to have you on today and honored as well. You, Debbie, are so accomplished. You're a multi-published author. You are a speaker, a podcast host as well. And also you've been featured on ABC, NBC, and the Kelly Clarkson Show, which I think is so cool. And so I can't wait for you to share all of this with us. Debbie, would you start by sharing how this journey has come to be for you? What was your path like that led you down this direction, authoring 2 books and speaking and all of that? Take it away.
Okay, you've got it. It's a crazy, I'm thinking in my mind as you're saying this, like either the Game of Life or Candyland, all those winding roads. I guess that's what life is, right? It's not a straight line. We'd like it to be, but it certainly isn't. I think my story basically began when I was 17, the day after I graduated from high school, and my father had a massive stroke and survived. But he became permanently disabled, and my parents soon divorced, and I have a younger brother. He's 4 years younger, so he was only 13, just turning 14 at the time. And I became my father's caregiver for the next 30 years of his life. He lived for 30 years. He never lived with me, but he was my responsibility as far as paying his bills, getting his groceries, doctors. As he got older, well, when he was still younger, in my 20s, I was trying to learn what is Medicare, what is Medicaid, what is Social Security and private disability. 20-year-olds don't have to know that stuff. Usually you don't have to know that until you're 40 or so. And so trying to understand all of that because money was an issue. So there were many times that I had to move him from one facility to another, either because of money or because I was physically moving from one place to another. And then when I had my oldest son, when he was 2, he was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And that set off a different type of caregiving. And I also have a younger son. So being a parent is being a caregiver. But I can say with one son with special needs, it's a completely different experience. And so I was simultaneously actually around the same time that my father was kind of declining, and then he had to go into a nursing home and his care, more hospitalizations, and it became more intense as my son was also requiring more and more therapy, or should I say whether he did require it, but I was like in a frenzy over it, feeling like under the gun. I needed to get him somehow up to speed with his peers by kindergarten. I just had this in my head, and I dragged this poor kid everywhere and anywhere for help because back then there wasn't as much support as there is today. So I'm very glad that things have changed. And then when my husband had always had different physical challenges, like long-term physical challenges, but at a certain point, he really started to, and I didn't know it at the time, that he was suffering from clinical depression and anxiety. And that was causing other types of health issues. And I wound up becoming my husband's caregiver. He wound up becoming disabled, and he and I worked together. So I have an insurance agency. He and I worked together for 20 years. So not only did I have to start taking care of him, But one day he just walked out of our insurance office and said, I can never come back. And so that left a big hole for me in my professional life as well. And I hoped that once he stopped working, that he would get better, but that never happened. He continued to decline. And eventually, unrelated to all the things that he was suffering from, he got diagnosed with a terminal blood cancer. And I took a leave from my job and stayed home with him. And he survived for 6 months from the time he was diagnosed. And the time that we're recording this episode, I'm coming up on the 2-year anniversary of being a widow. So with all that said, that doesn't even answer your question. On this journey, when I turned 50, I kind of had a little bit of a moment where I realized that my whole life I had been taking care of everyone else. And there was something for me about the number 50. I think for each of us, it's a different point in time, possibly, that you sit back and kind of analyze where you are in your life. And I realized that, wow, 50, chances are my life is half over or more than half over. And this went so quickly. And I don't want to say that my life was terrible. I mean, my goodness, I have so many wonderful, wonderful things to be grateful for in my life. But I didn't feel like it was like life was just pulling me along. I had no control, and I didn't think I had any control. All of these things, I viewed it as happening to me, right? I had to take care of my father. My son got diagnosed, my HUD, like all the things. And I never stopped to realize that even though life happens to us, each of us still has the opportunity and the choice to how we respond to these things. And I didn't have some pent-up desire to be a writer, to be an artist, to be, I don't know, professional tennis player. So it wasn't like I thought, oh gosh, I can't believe I never accomplished this. I didn't know what this was, but I just felt like there had to be more. There had to be more than that hamster wheel of checking off my to-do list every day, falling into bed exhausted, up in the middle of the night thinking, what do I have to do tomorrow? And who do I have to call? And getting up and just keep doing it day after day after day. And I'll just leave it at this. That was a decade ago. I'm 61. And since that time, I have literally been on a slow journey of discovery that has, like I said, led me down and led me to places I never could have imagined. Because I actually, even though I've been an insurance agent for 30 years, my first career I was a CPA. CPAs, you don't go to school for accounting and learn how to write. CPAs don't want to write. I never wanted to write. So just the fact that that's what I've wound up doing and discovering something that I actually enjoy, it is just kind of gives me hope and should give everyone else hope that, you know what? Each of us has so much more inside of us. We don't even know what we're capable of until we try. So I'll take a breath. Let you talk.
Oh my gosh. No, Debbie, thank you so much for sharing that. And I think you're right. Life is this kind of meandering path, and we sometimes can feel like it's a bit of a raging river and we're just being dragged along with whatever is happening. And it sounds like you got to that point where you had time to reflect on what had happened in your life and where you wanted to go moving forward. And it does often happen in that midlife, right? Whatever that midpoint is for each of us.
Yes.
And so it really sounds like that was the turning point for you, where you really reflected on what had happened before and everything that you had done in your life. And you accomplished quite a lot. I mean, being a CPA and having your own insurance company and the caregiving that you did. I mean, that's so, so much. I mean, really an accomplishment in itself for all of that. But now it's like, what can I do going forward? And I think this is always such a great opportunity for each of us to pause and reflect and see, is there something that I maybe didn't think I could do before? And I want to give it a try. And so I think that's just fantastic. And you're just living proof of that. Well, we each can discover something new about ourselves that we never thought we could do before. And so I love it. And so let's talk about then how we can take maybe excuses or circumstances. Like, I mean, you had real circumstances in your life that required you to be present to those things. But let's say there's somebody who's like, it's not quite the same level, but they're just like, but I don't have time. I've got this other job. I've got these other things that are pulling on my time. I can't do that other stuff. What are maybe some things that we can begin telling ourselves that will change that story?
I think we don't like to admit that that's a story, right?
Mm.
Because there are so many things that we do in a day that are just wasting time. I mean, how many times you just need some kind of mental break and you're scrolling on social media, or at the end of the day, you just want to sit down and veg out and watch mindless something on TV. I mean, we all do it, and it's not like there's anything wrong with that. But you have to realize that if you really want something, it's not like, I think I realized the fairy godmother is not coming down and granting me my wishes. It does require dedication, and you have to want it. It's not just going to happen. So it doesn't have to require that much time. I'm sure that if you did a time audit of what you do in a day, you could find pockets of time. And it doesn't have to be, I think we all feel like, well, I don't have an extra hour in a day. Maybe it's not an hour. What is it that you want to work on? I think that's something else, is that sometimes your problems or your aspirations seem so big and so daunting that they seem impossible. And when you break it down into really small steps where you don't even feel like it's really making a difference, that's when it gets easier to make the change. That's when, even if it's, I don't know what it, let's come up with something. Let's just say, for me, I'll just share with you, when I decided that something had to give. For me, my whole entire life, I've struggled with my weight. My whole life. I mean, big struggles, not 10 pounds, 100 pounds. Up and down, up and down, up and down. When I was in my early 50s, I had 100 pounds to lose, easily 100 pounds to lose. And I was so tired of it. And it's like, oh, here we go again. But I decided that that's where I was going to start, because that's where I needed to start for myself. That was my number one priority. When you are unhealthy, it creates just, you're unhappy, you're unhealthy. It just infiltrates into every part of your life. So in the past, every time I had dieted, my thinking was, well, I have to lose 25 pounds in 3 months. Otherwise, I'm a failure. Or by my birthday, or by the summer, or by that wedding that I have to go to. We all know how that is. And then if it didn't happen, or then if I quote unquote cheated, it was a waste of time. Forget it. What am I even bothering with this for? And I decided that this time I was going to have a different mindset. So here's a perfect example of something that didn't really require a lot of time. I decided, and this was obviously pre-COVID, you went to Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers is what, I've tried it all, but Weight Watchers is what I've been most successful with. I said, I'm going back to Weight Watchers, and my only goal is to attend the meeting each week, 1 hour a week. I'm not going to worry about what I eat. I'm not going to worry about exercising, drinking the water, tracking my food, like nothing. My goal is just going. And that's what I did. And I didn't lose any weight, but I developed a habit of going, started forging relationships with people. I found the meeting more interesting. I started to actually participate, which I hadn't really done in the past. I just got to that point where I was comfortable. And once I was comfortable with that, then I added something else small. And I didn't lose 25 pounds in 3 months. I don't think I lost 25 pounds in a year. But I said, I actually because I just made that one small change of just going to the meeting, which didn't have this immediate payoff, but I was feeling good because I was accomplishing the goal that I set out to accomplish. And when that happens, then you're like, oh, look, I did this. Maybe I can do a little more. And it built. It took me 3 years at least to lose 90 pounds. I never hit the 100. And what happened was I slowly started to realize that the whole problem the whole time was me. And it was my thoughts. It was how I was approaching it and how I had that all or nothing thinking, how I viewed myself as a victim. Look at that woman over there on Saturday night who's having appetizers and drinking. Poor me, I can't do that. I stopped. That wasn't true. She's not eating like that 7 days a week, 3 meals a day. I had to shift my thinking. And back then, lifestyle was not thrown around the way it is today. But really, for me, it was realizing, Deb, you're never going off this. This is truly not a diet. This is just how you have to live for the rest of your life. And it's taken me a long, long time. And I've found that my relationship with food, there is no good or bad. If I want to eat that cookie, I'm going to eat that cookie. And I'm not going to beat myself up. And I'm not going to say, well, now I might as well just eat everything in sight. Nothing changed though, right? Weight Watchers didn't change. The diet world didn't. All that changed was my thinking about it. And so it doesn't matter whatever your thing is, whatever it is that you want to accomplish, you're telling yourself you don't have time. You're telling yourself you don't have enough money, or whatever your excuse is, it's you. And that's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow, right? To be like, oh, so I've been the problem the whole time. But then it's also empowering because we can change it. It's not easy. It's not easy. But doing it one little step at a time, it really is empowering. And then it turns into a snowball effect.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Debbie, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. There's so much in there that you said that's I 100% agree with. I mean, first of all, we can only control ourselves. We can't change anything externally. We can only change ourselves internally, our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors. 100% agree with that. And finding time to do something that's important to us. Like you said, it doesn't have to be an hour every day. It could be an hour a week to start, and just making that commitment and following through with that every single week, and then going, okay, I've done that. I see I can do that. What else can I do next? And that's such a great way to think about it. It's like those tiny little steps. And I've talked about it before on other episodes. I love James Clear, Atomic Habits. It's like these little tiny incremental changes that we're making. It's like, let's just do this one tiny thing every single day. And what can we build on that? And then build on that. And it sounds like that's what you did. Just go once a week. Now, okay, I've done that. Now, what other change can I make? And you did, and you made that change. And then what can I do now? And ultimately, what did it lead to? You reaching nearly 100% of your goal. So yeah, tremendous. And in the process of that, what you learned about yourself, that you could trust yourself, and that you changed your thoughts around things, because that is all we can do, is change our own thoughts about these things. So brilliant. I love it. Oh my gosh. And so is this kind of, because I know you talk about like a moment for you that shifted your thinking. Was this that process? Is this what happened for you when that light bulb kind of went off?
I think what happened was I realized that I had to do something, and I didn't know what that something was. And that's why the first thing that I went to was the weight. From there, it's funny, something else that I had not wanted to think about. Like, I had this very deep, dark secret. It was a money secret. And I had, and still have, shame around it, particularly because of my background, because I know how to do the right thing. I am a CPA, I'm an insurance agent. Like it's money is, and was always in charge of our money. My husband really, he had a general idea of what was going on, but if I tried to tell him, he used to do the food shopping when he loved that, and he would go to 3 different stores, and our grocery bills were incredible. And if I had to say to him, like, dial it back, it would put him into a depression. So I stopped sharing. So what wound up happening was, for a variety of reasons, more debt, more debt, more debt. And then it turned to owing. Since I'm self-employed, you don't get your taxes withheld. You have to pay them quarterly yourself. And I wasn't doing that. And I was just getting more and more behind. And it was like, I'm an open book about usually everything. But this was the one secret my friends didn't know, my closest people, like nobody knew. And like I said, my husband had a general idea, but he never really knew the severity because I couldn't share it with him. And so I was going to have my own stroke over it. Really. I just tried not to think about it. I only thought about it like when the time came, and it was just one of those things where you have this secret, and the minute it comes to the top of your mind, you're just trying to push it away and don't think about that. Don't think about that because it's too difficult and it's too painful and stressful. And that's what I was doing. And one day, this was right before, it was actually February of 2020, Oprah was doing this like tour. It was kind of in conjunction with Weight Watchers, and it was in, I don't know, 10 or 12 different cities, and it was a full day event. And so I went, and I brought my cousin with me. It was fantastic, but it was like in a big stadium, a big indoor arena. There was like 16,000 people there. And at the end of the day, Oprah comes out on stage, lights down, and I don't recall what story she shared, but she shared this very personal story. And afterwards, she said something like, each of us has secrets that we're basically not owning. And if you continue to ignore it, it's eventually going to erupt like a volcano. And then you're going to have no control over it. You are better off dealing with it now. It might not be easy, and it might suck, but in the long run, it's the way to go. And I'm listening to her and I'm crying. And my cousin's like actually thinking maybe it had something to do with my husband, but it was this money thing. And so after that, I said, okay, it's time to own up. And I started doing other things. And obviously I can decrease my expenses or I can increase my income. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to start selling things on Facebook Marketplace. And this is, again, it wasn't as popular as it is today. I didn't know how to do it. I was selling I would sell something for $3. And I'm talking, I was in like hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. $3. What the heck? You could say, what is this going to possibly do for you? But I've got to tell you, I felt like I was doing something. I was finally doing something to address this problem. And I would sell the dumb thing for $3. And I had this envelope and I collect my dollars. And at the end of the month, if I had enough money to pay for all of our haircuts, it was money that I didn't have to take from somewhere else. And it was the same thing like with the weight loss. It was like, ooh, this is exciting. Look, I did this. What else can I do? What else can I sell? Now you're running around your house. Now you're trying to find all this stuff. Not that that alone was going to solve my problem, but it just started me down the path. And it gave me a sense of control when it felt so it was totally out of control. And just me going and talking to whatever, an attorney or an accountant, like whatever it was, just the act of doing that made me feel like I was taking control of the situation. And just that in itself was a relief because I was actually doing something about it. And I have no idea why I just told you that whole story and I lost the whole point of the whole thing, but you'll remind me.
Yeah. No, it was that moment. And it sounds like that was your moment when she shared that story
Yes.
and you realized. And by taking that action, you're like empowering yourself, right? Instead of denying the situation that's happening, even though it's just this tiny little thing, it's still very empowering because you are taking control of this aspect that you were denying before. And so I don't know, I'm assuming at some point it resolved, you got it resolved and handled or are still working on it or whatever the case may be. But what really matters is that it was the empowering moment for you. I'm taking control of this and I'm going to resolve this. I'm not going to ignore it anymore. And that's such an important lesson, whatever the case is for the person listening, myself, whatever. It's like when you are looking at it instead of denying or ignoring it, you can then begin to make all the changes that you need, even if it's one step at a time. So thank you so much for sharing that. And so I think I want to ask you, was this at this point, you're still working your insurance business? Had you even begun working on your books? Or is this still, we haven't gotten there yet? Yeah.
No, I had again, books, no, not in my thought. What wound up happening from there is I realized that I wanted to help other people with what I had learned. And so actually, I launched an online company at that point called the Caregiver Support Squad, with the goal being to help other family caregivers learn to prioritize their self-care. And so actually, instead of saving money, I spent a little money setting up the business and setting up a website and all the things that you have to do. And all of this was new to me, this whole online world, while still working. I still today, I still have my insurance agency. And what I wound up finding was that caregivers, and understandably had, and this is why I was creating the business in the first place, had difficulty focusing on themselves. When I met with them, they just wanted to talk about the problems with their loved ones. And I was in the middle of my own caregiving journey with my husband. That was very difficult. And I was empathetic, and it was just too much for me to emotionally handle. And I had to make the decision to basically scrap it. And what I decided is that my message was broader than just to caregivers, because my message was and is the fact that we need to stop making excuses. And it doesn't matter how old we are, and it doesn't matter how much money we have, none of that matters. When I realized that I had the power, everything changed. And I decided that if I consider myself halfway intelligent, if I made it 50 years and had no idea, there had to be others out there like me. And I needed to figure out a way to let them know. And so then it was, well, how? What am I going to do? And people say to you, oh my goodness, your stories, you should write a book, you should write a book. But it's just what people say. I never thought, oh yeah, I should write a book. And then it really came up because I decided that the best way to do that, to let people know, is to be a speaker. And when trying to launch that career, that's when the book came up. Oh, it's much easier, a book. And I'm thinking, well, how much does a ghostwriter cost? I don't even know. Like, where do you find one? Because I can't write a book. And I was listening to a podcast that I'm not a regular listener of. And the host had a guest on who helped first-time authors get their stories out there. And I liked her from listening to her. And I thought to myself, this is just too much of a coincidence. I was meant to listen to her. I'm going to meet her. And I did. And we met online. And she was launching a 12-week course for first-time authors. And here it is, more money, right? So I still got the money thing going on here. Do I invest more money? And I was excited. I was scared out of my mind because I didn't feel like I had the skills. I never wanted to write a book. I figured the other people always had a desire to write a book. I had all these limiting beliefs, let's just say that. And I'm about to make the decision to join. And literally, that's when my husband gets diagnosed with the cancer. And I I'm seeing a therapist at the time, and I said to the therapist, I'm embarrassed that I'm even mentioning that this is still on my mind. Obviously, it's not the right time. I'll put it off, blah, 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 blah. And she says, I disagree with you. This is the perfect time. I said, what? The perfect time? The group met every week. What if I can't meet? What if there's homework and I don't have the homework? What if, what if? And she said, who cares? You are going to need something completely separate from what's going on at home to distract you, something just for you. And if you aren't able to show up and you don't write the book, like, who cares? And so that's what happened. I listened to her advice. And even for the first at least 4 weeks, I never thought I was going to do it because I was really struggling with just how to do it. Like, even though it was a course, it was still a lot on your own figuring things out. And for me, once in my mind, at least, I had an organization. Some people, and there's terms for it, like you're a plotter or a pantser. Like, some people just sit down and they start writing. Not me. Like, there's that organization. I need to understand what it looks like. And once I understood that, then it was a lot easier for me to fill in the pieces. And I honestly, it wouldn't have happened if I scheduled in as much as I could time to write every day. And whether it was getting up before my husband woke up, if he was in the hospital, I brought my computer with me. It looked like I was moving an office into his hospital room. When he fell asleep, when he went for a test, I wrote. If he was home in the middle of the day, if he was laying down, I'll tell him I'm going upstairs unless it's an emergency for 1 hour. Don't bother me. And when he died, I was 3 chapters shy of finishing my memoir. So she was right. My therapist was 100% right. It was hard. It was super hard. But really, in the end, it's so interesting because who would have ever thought that would have been a good idea? But the idea that I had something, and I don't even want to say I looked forward to it because I looked forward to the meetings every week, but looking forward to the writing, not always, because it was difficult. And some days, even if I said I'm going to do it for an hour in the beginning, I couldn't do it for an hour. I couldn't even do it for 5 minutes. But like anything, get a little better at it as time goes on if you stick with it.
Debbie, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I just think it's amazing. I mean, again, having something to look forward to, absolutely. But you just shared how you took just whatever time you could carve out from your day to accomplish that. Just goes to show again, it doesn't have to be your entire day. It can just be an hour. It can just be 20 minutes. It could be whatever, 5 minutes if that's all you've got. But you worked toward making it happen on a consistent basis, and it ultimately came to fruition. And that's your book, On Second Thought, Maybe I Can, right? Tell us a little bit about it. What would the listeners find if they were to check that out? And then I absolutely want to talk also about the sprinkle effect, and that's your second book. But let's start with On Second Thought, Maybe I Can.
So it's my memoir. It is not every story of my life, but it's divided into 3 parts. The first part is when I'm mostly a child to young adult and how I developed a lot of my limiting beliefs, which we all have, whether for me it was, I'm not worthy, I'm always being judged, I'm not good enough. So the entire book is just 30 or so story. And this was a conscious decision that I found out I had to make. It is not a self-help book. So, you know how sometimes you read a book and it'll like tell you a story, and then at the end, the author will recap and say what she learned from that experience or give you some ideas to ponder. It's not that. It is literally meant to be inspiring. And so it's my journey. That's the first part. Part 2 is basically when all the stuff started happening to me. And there were different things. There's infertility, there's the money, the weight, starting my insurance agency, my son being diagnosed, a whole bunch of stuff. And then the third part is what happened after I turned 50. And then there's an epilogue that talks about the day my husband died. And so it's meant to be inspiring. After that was published, it was like, well, yeah, that's great. I'm inspired. But what did you do exactly? Like, how did you make these changes? And so that's what this book is, the newest book called The Sprinkle Effect, A Guide to Living a More Colorful and Fulfilling Life. It is how to add small sprinkles into your life that eventually lead to big changes. And sprinkles, I have 15 sprinkles. Maybe there'll be a part 2 with 15 or so more, because there's so many different sprinkles you can add into your life. But things like a sprinkle of mindset, a sprinkle of belief, a sprinkle of dreams, action, resilience, curiosity, joy. But this book is a self-help book. So with each sprinkle, I share a personal story of how that sprinkle affected me and what it means. And then I give you 3 exercises at the end of each chapter, as well as a journal prompt. And I say several times throughout the book, because I've personally discovered this, when I've read books like this, I don't want to do the questions. I just want to read the book. And I'm going to hope that it's just going to stick, right? But then what happens? I read the book, I put it on the shelf, and I'm like, yeah, that had some good ideas. I don't really remember, and nothing really changes. And I have found both ways, you have to do the work. And it takes time, right? And you have to think through. Or I would think, well, I'm just going to think the answer. And it just doesn't work the same as taking pen to paper. It's just not the same. And so I really do stress the importance. If you really are serious about making some changes, you got to put in the time and the work. And so I also created a companion workbook that goes with it. You don't have to have the workbook, but just it's like what I prefer, because if I'm looking around, if you're looking on video, because I'm like looking at all the things around me. Because if I go to do an exercise, like one day I'll be like, oh, let me answer that question in this little notebook. And then the next day I've got another little scrap of paper. So I created the workbook so that, no, you did everything in one place so that you could come back to it. And really, I could go back to it. We could all go back to it, because at different points in our lives, we'd have different answers to some of the questions.
Yeah, that's fabulous, Debbie. Thank you so much for sharing both of those with us. And I'm kind of like you, reading a book, you just think it's going to sink in and you're going to have all the answers and you're going to know exactly what to do, but you've got to do the work. You're 1,000% correct. You have to do the work. It's not just think and it's going to be different. You have to make changes. You have to take those ideas, those thoughts, and then implement them into your life. And that does include writing out your answers, because there's something about that connection, right? That
Yes.
writing it down, that physical action, it makes a difference. And so I totally agree with you. So fantastic that you've got a workbook to go with it that really does keep it all in one place so you can reflect back on it and have it all in one location. So bravo, good stuff. I love it.
Thank you.
Yeah, tremendous. Oh my gosh. Okay. So at this point, I know you also have a podcast, and I don't want to run out of time. Do you air episodes weekly? Is it you, or do you have guests? And it's Maybe I Can is the name of your show, correct?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yes. So it's Maybe I Can. It is weekly. I have a combination guests and solo episodes. It actually is a half-hour show that is live on Transformation Talk Radio on Tuesdays at 4 Eastern. And then it goes out after that on all the typical podcast platforms. And I just had my 100th episode, which is so hard to believe. And yeah, excited about it, just like you, because I hesitated doing it for so long. But when I reflect back on my journey, like I just shared, I got writing because I heard a woman on a podcast. I have so many different things in my life that happened because of who or what I heard on a podcast. It has played a very big role in my transformation. And so I wanted to offer the same to others. And I've actually gone back to the podcast, the woman podcaster, and I write about her in the sprinkle effect to just let her know, because I know myself and I know you know, we don't know who's listening. If you don't come back and tell us, we don't know. And to hear what kind of effect that you've had on someone's life, I mean, I know I'm speaking for you. That's why we do it. So it's so rewarding when you hear that. So I did give her a shout out in my book.
Oh, good to hear. Yes. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you've got so much great stuff to share, and having this platform is an opportunity to do that. And so, yes, also for the listeners, we love to hear your thoughts, your feedback. So anytime you leave a review, it just makes our heart sing, because we know we're making a difference in your lives in even just a small way. But in your case, it was a huge, huge change in your life that listening to that podcast episode made. And so just tremendous. Thank you, Debbie, again. I love it. Is there anything at this point that you haven't shared with the audience listening that you think they really should know? Would you like to share some thoughts or anything else that just is speaking to you that you want the listener to know?
So I'll end with a quote. And in my memoir, I talk about how I couldn't stand back in the day, even in the beginning of social media, like in yearbooks, they would ask you, well, what quote do you live by? And I'd be like, I don't have a quote that I live by. But what's wrong with me? Why don't I have a quote? I'm a person without a quote. And a few years ago, I was actually, I think, writing something, and something popped into my head. And I thought, oh, that's really good. Did I just come up with that? Or did somebody else? And I Googled, and it was somebody else. And actually, especially now, it's quite pertinent with the movie. So it's from Glinda the Good Witch, who said, "You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." And for most of my life, I thought that that just meant, well, Dorothy, if you just had clicked your heels 3 times and said, there's no place like home, you could have gone home. But the message is just how all of a sudden that one day I heard it and I went, oh. And so I really want everyone to consider, stop. You have the power, regardless of everything that's going on in your life, no matter how bad it is. You have the power to change it. And you just had to learn it for yourself. And for me, I had to learn it when I was in my 50s. And that's my goal, is if you out there listening don't know it, now you know. You have the power to change whatever it is you want to change.
Fantastic. I love it. Thank you so much. What a great thing for us to think about. We have the power within us to change anything that is happening in our lives. And it can seem like whatever we're facing is insurmountable, but we can make changes. We can choose differently. Whatever the case may be, we do have the power within us. And so, Debbie, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I love it. Oh my goodness. Okay. I always love to have my guests close out the show by sharing if there's books that have been influential or beneficial, or other podcasts, and you have not named the podcast that you were listening to, but if you'd like to do that now, or any other show that has been helpful for you, please share that with us now.
Okay. You know what? Before we came on, I meant to go on Siri and ask her if I'm saying her last name correctly, because I don't like that. But the badass books from Jen, you know who I'm talking about? Is it Sincero or Sincero? I don't know how she says it.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Sincero.
Yes.
Those books were, I think, one of the first books that, in kind of like the personal development field, where I felt like it wasn't boring. She has a great sense of humor. Everything's relatable. they're little short chapters, which always kind of makes it easier. Actually, I'm thinking of book number 3. This morning in the shower, I was thinking about book number 3. I'm like, I should do what Jen does because, I find when I like something, then that's what I want to do. So, and she has like 4 books and some other things. So I highly recommend them. The first podcast that I listened to was Primal Potential with Elizabeth Benton. She was someone who she lost a lot of weight and she also paid off a lot of debt. The premise is changing your mindset. I don't listen to her as much regularly anymore, but every morning I notice that I did this, and this is how sometimes you develop a habit you don't even know. When I'm putting my makeup on, I listen to the podcast Mindset Mentor with Rob Dial. And when I fast forward the commercials, it's like 15 minutes, whatever it is, it seems to be the perfect amount of time that I put my makeup on. And I'm pretty much familiar with everything he's talking about, but it doesn't matter. Just starting your day, listen, like in that mindset, it just sets you up for success, instead of like kind of ruminating in my own thoughts, right? As I'm putting my makeup on, thinking of my to-do list or something that I'm not looking forward to that day, or, whatever it is that we might be thinking about that might not be so positive. It's nice to just have the Mindset Mentor to set your day off on the right foot.
Fantastic. Great recommendations for sure. And I do love, and I always said Jen Sincero, but I think it may be Sincero. But in any case, her books are fantastic. She does have such a great writing voice. So funny. I absolutely agree with you. Great books. So I will detail that in the show notes and the podcasts as well. I listen to Rob Dial as well, and he is just so great.
Yeah.
Love it. So I will include those. And then, Debbie, would you share with us if the listeners have questions for you or want to follow along your journey, how would they be able to do that? Do you have social media sites that you want to share, website? Please do that now.
Thank you. So yes, I'm on all social media. It's usually in everything. I have to use my middle initial because if you just put in DebbieWeisse.com, you get to a realtor in California. So my middle initial is R. So my website is DebbieRWeisse.com. Most of my social media, Instagram, Debbie.Weisse. But if you go on DebbieRWeisse.com, all of the social media links, the books, the podcast, all the things are there. So one-stop shopping, it makes it easy.
For sure. I will be sure to detail that in the show notes. So thank you for that. And Debbie, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing all of these amazing stories with us, your journey, and all that you've accomplished. It's just been tremendous. So thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Desiree. It's been great.
Yes. We'll talk more soon.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.